Welcome to the Freddie Kissoon Show. Bring it!
Let me ask you this question. I would like to ask the AG to propose legislation for what we call small claims court. There are lots of poor people, for an example you just gave, that they have issues with others and sometimes with large firms, but the lawyer fee is greater than the fee you're claiming.
It is their
right.
The right that someone has. All our rights exist in context.
What is the context of a second medical opinion?
Because you're disrespecting the process.
No.
Jesus, this is common sense, man.
Any situation which you seem to do, you're just dealing with Afro-Guyanese issues. If one, you can't bring and pull the leaders of the African community together, you're failing. And if two, you can't put forward a future, a blueprint, and a plan for African Guyanese, you're failing as well.
Pleasant Wednesday evening to you. This is the very last day of 2025. When we were with you on Monday, we said we will look back at 2025. But there is more to see that could ever be seen in 2025. So one program could not do it. To look back at what went on brilliantly, miserably, negatively, positively, the contents of 2025 could not have been done in an hour. There's just too much to take in, too much to see, too much to ponder on. So what we will do on this very last day of 2025 is to go and look at other dimensions that we missed on Monday or that we did not have time for. This is the last day in 2025. I thank you for being with us on behalf of our operators, Adaiki Hicks and Robert Hussein, and co-host Leonard Craig. We'd like to thank you for being with us for the entire calendar year of 2025. Tonight, of course, brings down the curtain, and I guess a majority of people in Guyana will be with their loved ones and will be enjoying Holidays night. Just have a very, very enjoyable, splendid time. It doesn't come every day, so you have to make use of it. So let's continue what went on in 2025. As I said before, there was just too much to take in last Monday. And still we still would not complete the job this evening. Of course, Friday is a brand new year and we'll have to look at that brand new year. So we'll try as much as possible to bring interpretations and meanings to you of 2025. And let's start on a positive note and then we will go down the line. Do you know a beggar can become a king? Do you know an ex-jailman, an ex-prisoner can become a billionaire? And it rests on one pillar, education. You can come from absolutely nothing. You could be starving. And through an opportunity of education, you can rise to be the head of a multi-billionaire company, the head of the armed forces. That is what education does. It did it thousands of years ago. It did it hundreds of years ago. It did it a couple of years ago, and it did it this year to millions and millions around the world. There is no replacement if you want a future. There is no replacement for education. Education is a requirement if you want to take yourself out of a life of want, out of a life of not having what you would like to have. And last year was an important year for Guyana because people who could not afford a tertiary education at Guyana's only university will now be going there freely without paying fees. It brings back bad memories. If you read my article yesterday was my birthday, and if you read my article in the Chronicle, as you would know now, I do a daily column in the Chronicle, I reflected on my birthday yesterday, on my education, and that I passed, applied to UG, got in, but I didn't have the money for the fees. And of course, people helped me. I mentioned the guy who paid my fees, Brian Rodway. So, if I couldn't get the fees in 1974 to go into UG, I would have not had a university education. Now, if you don't have that money, you can go into UG. UG is now free, and that is commendable. The wealth of a country must be shared, and people should be entitled to the resources of their country, and you should not have to pay for some of these things that your country can afford. I think that university is too important. The University of Guyana is too important for it to be a catchment, a net only for people who can afford it. Now, having applied to university and get in and you don't have to pay, there is still the question of books, of transportation, of access to the internet, of having your laptop, and one would hope that the government will deal with that through scholarship program, in which they allocate a couple of hundred scholarships for people who can't afford the books and the accessories that go with having a university education. And that brings me now to something which I will deal with on Friday, but I want to talk about it now a little bit. Something called a means test. My daughter is abroad. Leonard lived in Germany. They tell me that when governments are giving things away, they use a means test. A means test is indispensable for helping those who don't have, in a country where wealth must be shared to its citizens by the government. A means test technology in the 21st century is piece of cake. The software can do it. Now, what is a means test? A means test is the scientific possession of evidence to show who has what, who gets what, who needs what kind of occupation you have, what kinds of needs you have and don't have access to. It's a simple scientific thing. We have the software in the world, and my daughter told me she sees it. Leonard Craig saw it in Germany. You use a means test to determine how you help people. I'm going to talk about wealth distribution, the cash handout on Friday. I don't believe in general cash handout. It was done this year and I reject it completely. At an absolute level, I do not believe any country in the entire world should distribute money freely to all of its citizens. It's not workable, it's insensitive, and it ends up giving money to people who don't need it, who take it and luxuriate on it. And it ends up with people having to buy things with that cash grant that would not do because of their needs. I am so bent on my rejection of universal cash grant, of national cash grant. I am so rejectionist about it. That's because of my strong upbringing as a poverty-stricken youth, that coming from a poverty-stricken family and know the wants of people. And therefore, if you're going to give scholarship to students to help with their transportation, their books, you should submit an application of where you work, where your parents work, and that the state can access that information through a means test. You can't have a middle-class child applying for a scholarship as against someone from a low-income area who don't have a cent to take transportation to go to UG. And I rejected last year the cash grant, and I will reject it next year. When I said I rejected it, it didn't mean I didn't take it. I took it last year, and that's because I need it. Unapologetically, I took it last year and will take it next year. But I believe there are people who don't need it. And I believe there are people who need it more than some of them who got it. I don't want to belabor the point because I am so rejectionist in my mentality, my attitude of national cash grant, that I will have more to say about it when Leonard Craig comes. Craig, as you know, is my friend for a long time, but he's always late. So let us look at last year, positively, UG. The second positive thing about last year is the Georgetown Hospital. I took my wife to a private hospital. She had a problem. And they just didn't have the resources to explore our ear problem. And so I went to the Georgetown Hospital, and they had everything. They tested her sound in her ear. They tested if she can hear. They tested for what problem she had. They just looked at the equipment. And the Georgetown Hospital is a beacon of hope for working class people and the laboring masses in this country. The Georgetown Hospital has done well last year. I sought the help of the Georgetown Hospital on 3 occasions, and I was very, very pleased. I was very pleased with the physiotherapy treatment I got. You know how expensive it is to pay for private physiotherapy. The Georgetown Hospital was one of the bright signs in Guyana last year. Now, there are some minuses, and that is understandable. If you're going to have a quality hospital that delivers services that you don't have to pay for, you're going to have a rush. You're going to have lines. It's just impossible to solve. The long lines at the Georgetown Hospital cannot be solved quite easily, simply because they offer resources that are so expensive that you go there. Happily, regional hospitals have been able to help alleviate the long lines. The hospital in Diamond, over the West Coast, is one is Enmore. So the Georgetown people, the amount of people at Georgetown would be decreasing. But there is a huge but. There are machines and there are kinds of treatments at Georgetown Hospital that you wouldn't find in the regional hospitals. So there will still be long lines. There are long lines. I've seen that at the X-ray. That is impossible to do away with because of the population of Georgetown and the kind of things the Georgetown Hospital offered, as you would know if you read my column day before yesterday, I offered my condolences in my column to one of the finest administrators of hospital management system in this country produce, Michael Kahn. I met him many, many moons ago at St. Joseph Mercy Hospital. Then he worked for decades at the Georgetown Hospital. A very, very fine hospital administrator that has given yeoman service to the Georgetown Hospital, and many, many of the things now in place at the Georgetown Hospital. We have to be thankful to Michael Kahn. Those are two of a car passing by my home and me filming in my yard. Leonard Craig said he'll be late. Leonard Craig is always late, but the show must go on. So let's look at some of the other things of 2025 that needs interpretation. Sadly, and I say sadly because I am no fan of WIN, led by Azzuddin Mohammed. I have known people since I was a teenager, but more importantly, since I entered UG in 1974, I have known quite a number of PNC leaders. Some of them I respect, some of them respect me, and some of them, the correct friendship has lasted over the decades. And quite sadly, the PNC was devastated last year. And quite sadly too, I don't know if the PNC will recover, because the PNC has gone in a self-destructive trajectory. The PNC has been on a regime of bad publicity, bad thinking, bad behavior, and the sum total of that was its devastation last September, in which from 32 seats it dropped to 12, and it will drop further if the PNC is not reborn. If it's not reborn and it continues on that self-destructive trajectory, we will not see the PNC anymore. During the elections, I did a television program with a television station named Ignite Television. And I said openly and unapologetically, I felt sad at what happened to the PNC. That's because of who replaced them. I don't have any respect for Azzuddin Mohammed. I don't think Azzuddin Mohammed should be in politics, and I don't think we should accept him. There are things about Azzuddin Mohammed that we don't know, and if we know, we will change our mind. But some of these things you can't say. Because suppose Mohammed says, I don't want this to go further, and slap a gag order on you from the High Court. Now there's something that happened at Land of Canaan that I would like to tell this nation. But I can't, because Mohammed is going to slap acts of restraining order, an injunction against me, against the company that broadcast this, and I really don't have time to go and take a lawyer. Of course, I will ask friends to take a lawyer for me, but I don't want to go down that route. So I felt a bit sad at what had happened to the PNC, because that's the party our Guyanese grew up with along with the PPP. There have been episodic and intermittent emergence of other parties. The United Force of Peter Degal, the Alliance for Change, the Working People's Alliance, the Democratic Labour Movement, the Liberator Party. They came and went, but it was always the PPP and the PNC. And don't mind they fight each other. They have an understanding. When the PPP was in government from 1992, I know PNC parliamentarians went to them and got things done. I know that. I know AFC leader asked the government to help a certain woman, and the government did. So they know each other. And it's so unfortunate that the PNC has gone down. What we need to look at is if it will rise again. Last year, 2025 has been, sorry, not last year, this year has been a bad year politically. Because what has happened is that instead of third credible parties rising up, they failed, and what replaced them was, as within party win. I'll just move this bench so I can come out of the sun. I don't have that hang up of what you must do on a set, and you mustn't drink water in a bottle on the set. If the white people decide that on their show they will drink bottle on the set, it'll be accepted. We allow those people to dictate the narratives and to dictate our behavior. I don't have any problem shooting this program in my yard. I don't have any problem drinking a bottle of water. If outside don't do that, they should not be our standard bearers. I don't have any problem. I did some TV programs this year, and some of the guests on the panel came late, and we were told, wait until there's an intermission and then the guests could come and sit down. I don't believe in that. I don't see what purpose it serves. You're holding the show, and the guest that came late just comes in and sit on the bench here. When Leonard Craig comes, he will walk in, the camera will be on him, and he will sit on the bench. There's nothing wrong with that. I was on the bench, and the sun was coming in because I'm in the yard, at the back of this natural Christmas tree, and I moved the bench. We, for a very, very long time, have accepted those people in the West as our standard bearers. Do you know what's one of the most popular jeans around the world? Those jeans with holes by the knee, holes all over. You know, if a Guyanese fashion designer had designed a jeans in which there are holes all around, you know how we would have laughed at him? You know what we would have said? We would have laughed at him. Do you know the billion-dollar industry that holy jeans created? So I am happy drinking my water on the set. Look. And I think nothing is wrong with that, and I don't want anybody to tell me, when you're doing these shows, you have to have glass, you have to have teacups. That is for them. If they decide to use a bottle on the set, you're going to see how these post-colonial people, these third world people are going to adopt it. You know, we don't want to put different things. We don't want to make cashew jam. So we make rightfully pineapple jam, guava jam. But if the outside people take cashew and make it in the jam, we embrace it. The outside people tell us the kind of things that was put on a pizza. Right, so if they tell us a particular fruit was on a pizza, we accept that. But we won't take the initiative and put our own fruits on the pizza. Those people aren't going to be my standard bearers, and I suggest that you should not let them be your standard bearers. Once I run the Freddie Kissoon Show and a guest is late, the guest will walk in and join the panel. You don't have to cut for an advertisement, cut. No, if they do that outside, so let them do it. I'm sitting on my bench. This other bench here is Leonard Craig. He hasn't come as yet. When he comes, you just sit on the bench. That's it. I don't see anything aesthetically, logistically wrong with that. But we grew up with the outside world telling us, when you have a panel and the guest is late, cut to an advertisement and then announce that the guest has arrived, and you see the guest sitting. When the guest is late, he or she just walks in and joins the set on the Freddie Kissoon Show. I have never, as an anti-colonial man, as a Caribbean man, never allowed the West to dictate for us. Do you know in France, and I think some other European countries, a woman cannot wear a burqa, she cannot wear that over her head. But in France, a woman and another woman can be seen kissing on a beach. That is legal. That is the kind of values they impose on us. For example, they're very big on homosexuality. There's a Western embassy here called the EU embassy. At least 5 members, high-ranking members of that embassy are homosexuals. Every 3 years, when they change staff, homosexuals come. That is nobody's business. I am not against homosexual at all. But what I'm against is people imposing their values on us in the Caribbean, in Guyana. You know, one of the greatest moments in the post-colonial world was the Kenyan President Kenyatta putting down, rightfully, in his own quiet style, Barack Obama idiotically and ignorantly went to Kenya and at a press conference telling the man Kenya must have gay rights. And the man said, wait. People in this country don't have the right to drinking water, don't have the right to good roads. And you come here and tell us that as a priority we should make gay rights? No. You have all of that in the US, so you then moved on to gay rights. When we have the right to education, the right to drinking water, we will then move on to gay rights. It was a fantastic moment in which the global South, the post-colonial world, told these Western people, don't come here and put your values on us. Don't. So that leads me to one of the things that occurred this year, something called incumbency advantage. Incumbency advantage does not exist. It's nonsense, it's asinine, and it does not exist anywhere in the world. But these EU people came here. These EU people, they came here, and not one of them would answer a question if you asked them when they were here. Do you think genocide is occurring in Gaza? They would not have answered you. They can't, because in Europe, the European countries do not consider genocide is occurring in Gaza. So these EU people come here and they criticize the 2025 elections because they said the PPP enjoyed something they called incumbency advantage. What is incumbency advantage? Well, I can't define it because it's stupid. There's no such thing as incumbency advantage. But as an academic, I'll have to explain to you, if you ask me, what they mean. By incumbency advantage, they mean the party that is running in the elections, competing for the elections, that party is in power, and that party has an advantage because they're in power. So they could open a school, they could put on a wing of a hospital, and that gives them an advantage in the elections. That is preposterous asininity. That doesn't mean when you open a wing of a hospital during an election, people will vote for you. It doesn't mean that. Incumbency advantage reduces people to morons and Pavlovian creatures. You can have a school open up in your area, and that doesn't mean you're going to vote for the government, the ruling party. But let's look at the hypocrisy in 2025. Something called incumbency. Do you know in every Western country, in those EU countries, they're stumbling over each other during elections. to rant and rave against immigrants coming in. That is the big election issue in every European country. And the incumbent uses the authority in power to get an advantage over the opposition parties by going hard on immigration because they feel it will bring them votes. Take the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Starmer won a landslide over a Conservative government that was very anti-immigrant. And before the ink could dry and the man swearing in, the man did put more anti-immigrant legislations and anti-immigrant regulations than his previous government, because a fourth party named a man named Nigel Farage is so poisonous against immigrants that Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, feel if I'm going to stop him from gaining traction, I got to be anti-immigrant like him. Now that is called incumbency advantage. It's happening in Italy. It's happening all over. Once it's an election, the incumbent becomes very, very insanely hostile to immigration. And so that is what incumbency advantage, if it exists, that is what it means. But they came here, observed the elections, and told us that the PPP enjoyed an incumbency advantage. So the Italians, the French, the British, the ruling parties in those countries didn't enjoy an incumbency advantage. Suddenly, there was an election in Italy, in the UK, in France, and suddenly government ceased to exist. There were no longer any prime ministers and presidents. There were no longer any government. You believe that nonsense? If this wasn't a talk show program, you could have used scatological words to describe that nonsense. Perhaps the most euphemistic word to use on a program like this is BS. When there is election in the United States, the president do not go on any train or any subway. He takes Air Force One and goes to the different states and he campaigns. Air Force One, the government transportation system, is what he takes. So they are saying when the president is going to, during the election, when he's going to campaign, he mustn't have any bodyguards. He must take a taxi. That is how these people see us. That is how these people see us. So the one of the things of 2025 was this nonsense of incumbency advantage. That is what the EU told us. So let's switch over now. I'm not seeing Craig. Craig is not coming. I don't know. He said he's going to be late. Let's switch over to some other aspects of politics in 2025. Nigel Hughes. Sadly, we may be seeing the end of Nigel Hughes. 2025 may have ended the career of Nigel Hughes. Nigel Hughes was a good friend of mine, stood with me during the long libel trial. You know, that is now history. President Jagdeo had sued me, and he stood with me the long libel trial. And when I look back at Nigel Hughes' déploiement, political déploiement from 2020, we began to drift apart. Because I found out during 2020 that a lot of these people that I shared very, very heavenly camaraderie with were using me as an East Indian to fight against a government they thought was an Indian government. And I had political capital for them. But they were not democratic. They had a racial agenda. And that racial agenda was exposed in 2020. My agenda in 2020 was people have a right to vote and let them vote for who they want to. And some of my close friends said, no, we want African Guyanese and we want the middle class in power. And so I parted with Nigel Hughes. And let me tell you why I parted with Nigel Hughes. So what happened to Nigel in 2025? Nigel decided to contest elections and he lost badly. Did not even get 3,000 votes. This was the charismatic, popular Nigel Hughes. And I felt sad that he entered politics in 2025 because the man he was, the man that I knew before 2020, was a man that had multiracial support, that young people across the racial divide respected. And then after the 2020 election, Nigel went in a very, very sordid direction, hobnobbing the company of people whose racial poison was unbearable. The ethnic poison that emanated from them, and the cost-down mentality, David Hines, Whitford Burke, Mark Benchop. That is the direction Nigel went into. And he should have stayed in that direction and not contested politics, because people, those young boys and girls that liked him in 2014 and 2015, even liked him when NUAFC got into power, because he was one of the miserable performers. He threw that world away. He went into the world of somebody as sordid and completely unacceptable to modern civilization, Whitford Burke. And so Nigel, or however he thought of himself, he contested the election, and someone like Amanza Walton deserved, that didn't have the long history of Nigel, got more votes than Nigel. Nigel and the Alliance for Change completely devastated. That was one of the negative things of 2025. That this guy who had multiracial support and who had support across demographics just threw it away. Of course, one of the things that killed his career, political career, was that strange, or I don't want, what word I should use, Obia mathematics. 34 is a majority of 65 and now 33. Well, that's one of the reflections for me on 2025. Once again, if you just join us, it's the last day of the year, and we thank you. Thank you so much. When we look at the viewership, when we look at the reaction we get, we have to be very grateful to you for sticking with us for 3.5 years. It's been a nice ride, and we have learned a lot. We will do the call-in program from next year. The call-in program will have a new studio, and we'll do the call-in program. But outside of the call-in program, I think we will continue with this al fresco environment. I prefer to use the tropical nature of Guyana to do these talk shows in the Botanic Garden, in the Promenade Garden, by the seawall, in my yard. This is, background is my Christmas tree that is old as the time that I left Workmanville and came here. So let's switch over to something that is positive of 2025. The great bridge, the Barajagdio River Bridge. And I don't have a problem in the name of Barajagdio River Bridge. Barajagdio, Donald Ramatar, Sam Hines, Desmond Holt were the presidents of this country. And you should let people know they were presidents by naming things after them. I couldn't bring myself conceptually to reject the bridge being named after Baba Jagdeo. Because Mr. Jagdeo was president since 1999 to 2011. You're not going to leave anything for history to remember him by? No, that's a requirement of government, that you let the next generation know who your people were. And so I didn't have any problem with that, with the name. I think things should be named after Desmond Hodge. Something big and huge should be named after you, Desmond Hodge. So one of the positive things about 2025 was that bridge. It's as handsome as any bridge in the world. But there's something about that bridge that people don't talk about. And I want to use this last program of 2025 to bring it to your attention. The arrival of China as a superpower in the world. That bridge was built by the Chinese. And that bridge can stand up with any other bridge built by the Western world. And don't talk. If one of the Western countries had bid for it, how much it would have cost us? Probably twice the amount that the Chinese are. That is something of 2025 that we overlook when we look and discuss and embrace the Baba Jagdeo River Bridge. It was Chinese technology. It was Chinese engineering at its best. And the Chinese will do more for Guyana if we allow them to, because the prices we have to pay for infrastructural projects from the Western world will be far higher than what the Chinese will bring. Everything the Western world build in the global south, it's more expensive. And in 2025, we should thank the Chinese for giving us a fantastic bridge. The Baba Jagdeo Harbour Bridge was one of the glowing achievements of 2025. And so that is one of the high moments of 2025. Now let's go right down and look at the low moment, one of the low moments of 2025. And that is the Leonard Craig dealt a little bit about this. But his context was the election. He said he never saw an election in which people just barefacedly, openly proclaim race as a factor. That an Indian person should not say anything about an African Chinese. You must vote for your own race. He said that in the context of the election this year. I want to put it in a broader framework that in 2025 we had this race, this appeal to race. And do you know what is the opposite to the highest point in 2025? Some of the highest points. For me, the highest point in 2025 was the personality, charisma, and success of Dr. Mohammed Irfaan Ali, President of the Republic of Guyana. I thought that man is an exceptional man. And for me, his electoral brilliance was the top of the achievements of 2025. And there are other things, like I said, the Baba Jagdeo Harbour Bridge. But do you know what's the opposite to all of that in 2025? The Adrianna Young scandal. Kit Nascimento in an interview, you just look at his expression and he couldn't believe it. And he said it was one of the worst psychological exploitation, I think those are the words he used, I can't remember, of a political party, of their supporters. The Adrianna Young scandal, the Adrianna Young abomination, the Adrianna Young degeneracy remain one of the lowest political points in Guyana, even more than the Buxton massacre. I'll tell you what, I would put it as more dangerous and more degenerate than the Buxton massacre. The Buxton massacre was confined to the East Coast, and life was quite normal in the other 9 regions of Guyana. People in Berbice, people in Region 2 didn't even know what was going on in Buxton, although it was a dangerous moment. But the Adrianna Young scandal was just nationally manipulated by people with the express intention of creating racial division. They framed the narrative in a racial way that an Indian hotel owner murdered a little black girl. There was nothing like that. There was nothing like that. That girl drowned. And mistakes were made about how she drowned, and the body was put in the pool there. And so it was one of the saddest moments in Guyanese politics, because that Adrianna Young scandal was used by Azzuddin Mohammed to obliterate the PNC. There are things about that scandal that I have written about in my daily columns in the Chronicle. But now, on the last day of 2025, I am going to tell you things and couch it in safe, grammatical terms rather than getting involved in libel. There are things that happened last year that constitute one of the sordid political moments the past 5-10 years in Guyana. And that is why 2025 is a year we should remember. It's a year in which Azzuddin Mohammed, with all his low mentality, with all his lack of education, was able to completely subdue the People's National Congress. And do you know what he did, how he did it? He did it in 2 ways. He saw how they were manipulating the Adrianna Young tragedy, and he latched on to it. He said, look, if I support them, then I'm going to gain popularity. I'm going to gain popularity, my profile will rise. And so the guy latched on to the Adrianna Young tragedy. The mother of Adrianna Young said that Azzuddin Mohammed gave her $6,000 to have another post-mortem, and she gave that money to Darren Wade, very, very strong PNC embedded lawyer. So you see, the thing was there. But what we did not know, and we don't know up to now, has not been made public, is Azzuddin Mohammed poured money into opposition parties during the Adrianna Young scandal. And when he did that by the hundreds of millions, he became the opposition king. They were relegated to the sidelines. And what they did then is, because he was this king, this financial king, psychologically they were trapped. There were no alternative. They elevated him. So they could not now campaign against him. They had to campaign in a subordinate position to him. You should have been around the election campaign to see when wind goes into these areas, there was no other opposition presence. The PNC just could not campaign against him. They were psychologically demobilized. That, if you're going to review 2025, you have to put a lot of analysis in the Adrian Young scandal. When we were here last Monday and we ended the program, we said, no, you can't analyze the contents of 2025 in Guyana in 1 hour. And even now this program is about to end. We still haven't covered a lot of grounds. But the one that need to be mentioned, the two that need to be mentioned if you are going to analyze 2025, any other talk show program, any newspaper columnist, anybody analyzing 2025, the highest point was Mohammed Irfaan Ali and his political brilliance, and the lowest point was the Adrian Young tragedy. What we do not know, and what has not been publicly announced, is the April 28th attempt to burn down Guyana, Georgetown. As you know, 28 Chinese supermarkets were assaulted with one being burned down. And do you know who financed the scrapeheads? Those motorbikes were bought for the scrapeheads before the post-mortem results, because we knew that there will be problems after the post-mortem. When and the opposition were planning these things, they know, and so a whole set of motorbikes were bought for the scrapeheads. And then the scrapeheads unleash violence on November 28th. All of that was planned. And people talk about when, but people talk rightfully about the negative personality of Win and Azwaddin Mohammed. But nobody has researched the financing of the scrapeheads violence on April 28th. And the more and more you peep into 2025, the more you see how dangerous Win is, how stupid the PNC has become, and the sad tragic episode of the Adrian Young tragedy. That thing was used relentlessly by the PNC, the WPA, well, what's her name? Amanda Walton Deserve continued to say, even during the election time, the horrible death of Adrianna Young. And to this day, she cannot even put a paragraph in the description of how that death occurred. That girl accidentally drowned, and her family neglected at that moment to get into panic mode and look for her. And unfortunately, people say that they looked at the pool and there was nobody there, and so that gave the opposition capital to roam Guyana, preach race hate, and try to destabilize the country. I would conclude by saying that when we look at 2025, I'm going to do a daily column on the year just gone by. I do my daily column, so I'm going to do a daily column looking back at 2025, and I cannot and would not dare miss the Adrianna Young tragedy. It was one of the lowest moments in Guyana the past 10 years. I'm going to conclude now. I just want to show you one of my babies is here. Just bear up with me. This is one of the things I love very much in my life. This is one of my babies. I'm about to conclude, and he just ran by my feet. Thanks for being with us for 2025. Something happened to Leonard Craig. He didn't turn up. But it was a very, very absorbing, interesting ride on the Freddie Kissoon Show. I can't begin to thank you. Can't begin to thank you enough. Say bye-bye to my baby, and we will see you on Friday evening. His name is Ginger. Ginger, say happy holidays.